When people think of horrific natural disasters that claim the lives of hundreds or thousands of innocent people, we generally envision terrible earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, and blizzards. However, in July of 1995, a disaster struck the Midwest United States with just as much fury, but was in the form of a massive heat wave that wreaked havoc on the city of Chicago. The lack of preparation and warning, along with a poor response from politicians and emergency authorities, turned an uncomfortable 5-day period into an absolute disaster, and the number of deceased quickly grew into the hundreds. Chicago, Illinois is a city that experiences very cold winters and warm summers. In the wintertime, temperatures can drop below zero. The Windy City, as it's also known, is of course famous for its strong winds, which can reach 20 miles per hour, making the bitter winters feel even colder. The city and its residents are prepared for these winters and know how to survive them. During the summertime, however, temperatures are typically pleasant between 78 and 92 degrees Fahrenheit. The hottest month, July, is when you might expect temperatures in the low 90s. Still, that temperature typically drops significantly during the night. However, in July of 1995, a large high-pressure system moving eastward traversed its way across the Midwest, causing temperatures to soar. The system brought extremely high humidity and almost no winds, while keeping temperatures in the high 80s even at nighttime. It hit the city of Chicago on July 12th, causing the temperature to rise to 97. But that was only the beginning. All the normal events were still going on as usual, and despite the blazing heat, it didn't feel like a natural disaster that would kill hundreds of people was beginning. The White Sox were taking on the Brewers at Comiskey Park. The mayor attended a ribbon-cutting ceremony at Navy Pier, and of course, many people stayed inside in their air-conditioned homes, thinking nothing of it. Emergency services needed to make a call for help, or at least release a heat emergency warning, but failed to do so until the last day of the heat wave. They were completely unprepared for what was about to occur. The following day, the high reached an absolutely scorching 106 degrees. Moisture from prior rains drove the humidity up to record levels. The only other documented higher temperature in Chicago was at Midway Airport during the Dust Bowl in 1934, but even then, the humidity was much lower. The cloudless sky offered little assistance in blocking the heat waves. According to the heat index, the temperature felt like 125. The heat was trapped by the brick buildings and asphalt parking lots of the city, then radiated outward. Add that to the pollution and heavy air, and the city felt like a death sauna. 911 calls started flooding in, and emergency rooms began to quickly fill up. Over 3,000 fire hydrants were illegally opened so that the gushing water might offer some relief. The slow response of authorities to recognize the seriousness of the emergency only made matters worse, and the 5 cooling centers of the city were not being fully utilized. The death toll began quickly as older citizens with no air conditioning began to perish. In previous heat waves back in the 30s, the elderly felt safe in sleeping outside near the park or along Lake Michigan, but by 1995, this was not a safe option. Also, much of the population living in marginal areas had burglar bars on their doors and windows, making it difficult for rescue workers to enter. Others refused to even open their doors, having a natural distrust for politicians and city employees. By July 14th, on the north side of the city, nearly 50,000 residents were horrified when their power went out due to multiple blown transformers. This, of course, meant the loss of air conditioning amidst the worst heat wave the area had ever recorded. Hospitals struggled as patients who were already admitted for previous health problems were suffering heat stroke, while new patients flooded in. They were forced to bring in portable air conditioners just to keep their previous patients alive while working on the new ones. Meanwhile, the doctors and nurses were soaking through their scrubs with sweat, barely able to operate themselves. The mayor of Chicago, Richard M. Daley, tried to diminish the seriousness of the situation.
We all have our little problems, but let's not blow it out of proportion. It is a crisis. It's hot. It's hot out there. We all walk out there. It's very, very, very hot. It's like getting heavy snow. It's like getting real cold weather. Yes, we go to extremes in Chicago, and that's why people love Chicago. We go to extremes.
Despite his words, the death toll continued to rise. Due to the unusual demand of emergency services, ambulance response time fell to 20 to 45 minutes instead of the usual 4 to 6. Oftentimes, by the time they arrived, it was too late. Police officers became completely exhausted after removing bodies from homes and apartment buildings. And it wasn't just the elderly who were dying. A daycare provider left 2 3-year-old boys in the back of her vehicle for more than 90 minutes. Both died of heat stroke. Fortunately, the vast majority of children survived, but there were 2 victims in their 20s, 11 in their 30s, and 36 in their 40s. 41 victims were not even identified and buried in a mass grave. The total amount of victims has been estimated at about 739. Without a doubt, over 500 people died as a direct result of the heat wave. Black people died at a disproportionate rate, and according to Robert Starks, a professor of political science and head of the Task Force for Black Political Empowerment, we knew it was much more of a disaster than what the Daley administration was claiming, because on the South Side and West Side, we kept hearing about people dying. The hallmark of the Daley administration in regard to the African American community was, we'll get around to them when we can. Isolation was part of the problem, but the health department should have had people checking on the elderly. They should have had door-to-door contact with those people, taking them to cooling centers, taking ice to them, taking water to them, and in some cases even installing air conditioners. The heat finally relented on July 17th when the high reached a more normal 89 degrees. Nevertheless, for the next several days, the rate of incoming patients stayed higher than normal and the death toll continued to climb, with more reported deaths and bodies being discovered. There were also deaths reported in St. Louis, Missouri and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The heat wave affected the entire Midwest, but no city suffered more than Chicago. The mayor admitted that the city could have done better, but also claimed that he had no criticism whatsoever for himself, his commissioners, or his city employees. Chicago took immediate action to prevent such a disaster from happening again by setting up telephone banks to check on the elderly and made sure to broadcast warnings over TV and radio whenever a heat wave was incoming. More than 1,000 electric fans were delivered to elderly people who live alone. Most importantly, the National Weather Service and City of Chicago developed a new watch and warning criteria while also enhancing emergency coordination. Such a collective failure should never be allowed to happen again. Despite the mistakes made during the disaster, no member of Mayor Daley's team lost their job. Thank you everyone for checking out today's video on the terrible 1995 Chicago heat wave that killed as many as 739 people. Let me know your thoughts down below, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe button. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you in the next video.